Have you ever wondered if you would survive World War I? What would you have needed to endure? Would you have been cut down by an unseen sniper's bullet before you even knew what was happening? Or perhaps you would have succumbed to the long-term effects of trench foot, a condition so painful it could take a man's life. Today, we will answer these questions and more as we help you find out if you would have lasted in the trenches of World War I. Question No. 1. What was the first thing you did when you woke up every morning? A. Checked your weapon. B. Made your bed. C. Brushed your teeth. D. Nothing. You couldn't be bothered. You chose a well. Looks like you got the makings of a survivor. Soldiers who were prepared for their day had a better chance of making it through the war. In fact, many modern armies still follow similar routines to this day. Checking your weapon was essential in the trenches. It was your best friend, your only defense against the horrors that lay just beyond the wire. So good job. Looks like you might have survived the war. Move on to question No. 3. If you chose B, C, or D, unfortunately, you wouldn't have lasted very long. Making your bed, brushing your teeth, these were the luxuries of life back home. And while they may have seemed like simple comforts, the reality was that those who indulged in such self-care were more likely to end up dead than alive, not because they were careless, but because such actions wasted precious time that could have been spent on essential tasks, like checking your equipment or tending to a wound. Question 2. What did you think about when you heard the word artillery? K. Shells bursting over the enemy lines. K. Food. C. Rain. D. Nothing. You didn't listen to the barrage. If you chose A, well done. You were ready. For the next time the guns rumbled, you would know exactly what to do. If you chose B, well, while it's true that artillery fire did occasionally land on friendly positions, food wasn't one of the things you should have been thinking about when the barrage began. So, unfortunately, you probably wouldn't have made it out alive. See, not much of a survivor, are you? When the artillery started, it was important to get to cover quickly. To think about nothing was a surefire way to lose your life. If you chose D, though, well done. A clear head and a plan meant that you would have had a better chance of making it out alive. Now, move on to question No. 4. Question 3. It's nighttime in the trenches. Did you hear a whistle? What do you do, A? Investigate? B. Shout beware. C. Stay in your trench. D. Grab your rifle and prepare to fight. If you chose A, B, or C, you were probably not a soldier. Only someone who had absolutely nothing to do with the military would investigate, shout, beware, or stay in their trench when they heard a whistle at night. If you chose D, you were clearly a keen soldier, and that means you probably would have lasted in the trenches of World War I. But there's only one way to find out for sure. So how many did you get right? If you got 4 right, congratulations, you really would have been a survivor of World War. I share this result with your friends and ask them to find out if they would have survived. 2. If you got 3 or 2 correct, you might have gotten by with a bit of luck. But we're afraid you weren't the most skilled soldier. If you got 1 or 0 correct, well, we're sorry to say it. But you probably wouldn't have lasted very long in the trenches. Take comfort in knowing that you have the opportunity to learn from your mistakes and come back stronger next time. Thanks for watching. War is not just about the charge, the desperate flight, the cold, quiet labor of staying alive. Cages, construction, and repairs were essential to the defense of any position. As a rule, no man could be relieved of duty until he had received instruction in his successor. That meant that every soldier had to learn how to dig. Shovels were issued as standard equipment, as essential as rifles. In the static war of the Western Front, the work of the sapper and the miner was as dangerous and as vital as that of the assault troops who went over the top. Soldiers dug in shifts, 8 hours on, 8 hours off. They reinforced the walls with sandbags, laid duck boards across the mud, bailed out the water. If the trench walls slumped inward, they slid down and buried the sleeping soldiers beneath them. Rats burrowed tunnels of their own, 30 or 40 feet long, which they lined with silk or cloth. Soft material that they stole from laundry piles, or, more tragically, from dead bodies. They dragged back scraps of food, stale bread, rancid meat, and gnawed the bones of the fallen. Sometimes they fought with mice for possession of a dead cat. When a rat was served up as a supper, the men joked that it was a good omen, a sign that they would soon be eating something better than trench stew. Wire had to be twisted by hand into intricate patterns to form the barbed concertina. Then came the hammering of the stakes, the driving of the put log, the steady drip of baling, water from collapsed walls, the squelch of leather, and the creak of shovels. The air hung heavy with the smell of damp earth and stale waste. There was always another section collapsing, another wall slick with moisture, another place where the timber had given way, and the whole bloody structure threatened to slide back into the abyss. And yet, the work must be done in silence. The enemy was too near. Careless noise, a clinking tool, a sudden shout, and the men might bring a hail of bullets. At night, men would creep out to the parapet, working by the light of the moon, repairing listening posts, stretching new wire, laying traps, one eye on their task, the other scanning the dark horizon. They worked without speaking, their faces illuminated by the ghostly glow of phosphorus shells that fell beyond the trenches, the faint light outlining the tense muscles of their faces, the grim set of their jaws, the haunted look in their eyes. Trenches were the stage set for a murder most foul. It's foul. The very mud that sucked at a man's boots was soaked with the blood of friend and foe. Shell fire and sniper bullets tore through the flimsy defenses. Sleep was a treacherous luxury. Men dug into the soft earth, 8 hours on, 8 hours off. Through sun and rain and mist, through the stench of rotting bodies and the drone of menacing aircraft. Each shift, the same back-breaking labor of digging, filling, hammering, weaving, tamping, ramming, smoothing, always the unending task of smoothing. Every spadeful of earth was a defense against death, every sandbag a modest shield from fire. For these men, war was not a glorious crusade, not a noble cause, not an adventure, not a test of courage. It was an ordeal, a curse, a fate worse than death, to be trapped in a tomb of mud and blood, surrounded by the ghosts of the dead, cut off from hope and sunlight, condemned to a life of fear and fatigue, the perpetual victim of unseen, unheard, remorseless death. This is the other side of war, not the charge, but the cold, quiet labor of staying alive. If you enjoyed this episode, please follow for more updates. Thanks for watching. Segment 3, The Soldier's Kit, Equipment and Upkeep. Now imagine unpacking your standard issue. A webbing of pouches, straps, and tools. A Linfield rifle, oiled and always near. Ammunition clips, a trench periscope, a helmet dented at the brim, a gas mask in a canvas bag. Each item is survival. You clean your rifle daily, wiping away moisture and grit. You fold your greatcoat carefully, though it smells always of damp wool. Socks, if dry, are rotated meticulously. Laces are retied, knots checked. A soldier's kit is heavy. It must be worn always, even in sleep. One eye remains half open, one ear listening. You carry a small notebook, a tin shaving mirror, a photograph, letters. They are reminders of a world beyond the wire. You learn to mend, to conserve. Broken strap, a missing button. These are small crises. You barter and swap. A clean handkerchief is worth its weight. Dry matches are precious. In this landscape, where bullets fly and rain falls without end, a well-kept kit is your only sanctuary. It's day 47. The rain has not stopped. It seems the earth has cracked, and the water will not be contained. We move through the mud, pull the triggers. We watch the wounded birds fall from the sky. We see the enemy and he sees us. There is nowhere to hide. No trenches, no tunnels, only the sucking mud that pulls us down. The wire has been cut. We advance with fixed bayonets, rifles at the ready. The air is filled with the rattle of machine guns, the thump of mortar. My ears are ringing. I cannot hear the screams above the roar. I cannot see my men, their faces obscured by the mist and the blood. I smell cordite and fear. My hands are slick with sweat and grime. My boots are filled with water. I am soaked to the bone. The rain is freezing. I have lost all sense of time. What is day? What is night? We are beyond exhaustion, beyond hunger, beyond fear. There is nothing left for us but the endless gray. We take cover behind a shattered wall, huddled together, sharing what little warmth we can. Faces, gray and grim, are illuminated by the flares. I see the red stain spreading on my comrade's tunic. He coughs, blood flecking his lips. We do not speak. What words can we offer in the face of this unending horror? I pull my greatcoat tighter, trying to shut out the cold and the cries. The wind rises, whipping the rain into a frenzy. It is a violent, angry thing, tearing at our clothes, clawing at our faces. I bury my head in my arms, trying to shut out the sound of the wind, the rain, the screams. And then I am running, stumbling through the mud, slipping and falling, the rain washing over me, the wind screaming in my ears. I am running for my life. The explosions are deafening. The ground trembles beneath my feet. I see the flashes in the sky. Feel the heat on my neck. My ears are throbbing, my heart pounding in my chest. Adrenaline surges through my veins. I am beyond pain now, beyond fear. I am beyond all feeling. I keep running. Must get out of this place. I must survive. I collapse on the soggy ground, gasping for breath, my body shaking with exhaustion. The rain has stopped. A thin sliver of moon peeks through the clouds, casting an eerie glow on the muddy landscape. I look up at the endless sky, feeling utterly alone, utterly defeated. How much longer can I endure this? How much more death and destruction can the world contain? Will there ever be peace? Will I ever see the sun warm my skin again? Will I ever feel the gentle touch of grass beneath my feet, the sweet taste of fresh water on my lips? Or is this to be my fate, to wander endlessly through this gray, watery world? A soldier without a war, a man without a country, a soul without peace? And so the story ends, or perhaps it never began, or maybe it's only just begun. The soldier's kit, a heavy burden and a saving grace, a reminder of humanity in a world turned gray. It is a testament to the indomitable spirit of those who serve, a symbol of their resilience in the face of unspeakable horror. For in the darkest depths of despair, when all hope seems lost, a soldier's kit remains, a beacon of light, a promise of survival. And then there is time, too much of it. In the hours when shells do not fall, men wait. Some write. Slowly, deliberately, they compose words to mothers, wives, or girls they once knew. Paper is scarce, pens dull, but still the letters are written. Coma, others gamble. A crust of bread, a cigarette stub, dice clack on an overturned helmet. They read old newspapers, tattered books passed from trench to trench, sometimes poetry, sometimes just words. There is laughter, jokes about the mud, about the officers, about the food. It is not always funny, but it fills the air. There are rumors of war's end, of mail on the way, of better boots, new rations. Men smoke, stare at the sky, count lice, sleep lightly, dream of trains and baths and beds. And always they listen for the sound of the whistle, the signal that quiet has ended. The lull between bombardments can last for minutes or hours. It is a fragile thing, this peace, precarious as a wounded bird. It can end as suddenly as it began, as abruptly as a shell exploding overhead. When the shooting starts again, men will scramble for their rifles, dive for cover, seek safety in numbers. But in the moments before the storm, there is a strange stillness, and in that stillness, men find ways to endure. Some of them turn to writing. They rummage through their packs for paper. Anything to write on? Envelopes. 2 are prized possessions now, carefully saved, reused, their addresses long obliterated. With a stub of pencil or a pen that's seen better days, they write. The paper may be scarce, the ink may be fading, but the words come easily. They write to mothers who never asked to have their sons join the army, 2 wives who understand all too well the cost of war, 2 girls they once knew a long time ago under a different sky. They pour their hearts out onto paper, telling stories the post will never deliver, dreams that will never be shared. They write to make sense of the senseless, to give meaning to the mud and the blood and the endless rain. Writing becomes a lifeline to a world that feels increasingly distant, a way to hold on to something real in a landscape of dying men and dying hope. Others play games. The stakes are low, the prize is meager, but the game is life. Gamblers always say it's just a game. They're not serious. And so the dice keep clacking on an overturned helmet. The cards keep shuffling in worn, dirty hands. The dominoes falling into patterns as old as the hills. There are no big wins in this war-torn world, only small victories over boredom and despair. And maybe that's enough. They read whatever they can get a hold of, old newspapers with stories of a world untouched by war. Tattered books passed from trench to trench, pages dog-eared and underlined. Poetry is popular now, words that give voice to the voiceless, stories that echo the silent screams in their hearts. Taint, they read to escape, if only for a moment, the horrors that surround them. To lose themselves in words can be a kind of victory, a way to hold back the darkness that threatens to consume them. There is laughter, too, in the trenches, gallows humor that rises like a stench. Jokes about the mud, about the officers, about the rats that shared their trenches. Laughter that masks fear, that turns despair into something a little less heavy. It is not always funny, this war, but sometimes laughter is the only way to keep from crying. Rumors spread like wildfire in the trenches, whispers of the war ending, of mail finally arriving from home, of better boots and new rations. Men cling to these rumors as life rafts in a sea of mud and blood. Hope is a dangerous thing in the trenches, but it's a necessary one. And always, always, they listen for the sound of the whistle, the high, piercing whistle that cuts through the air. The sound that tells them the quiet has ended, the shelling has begun, and the fragile peace of the lull is gone. All they have now is the storm. Her path took her to the world of international espionage, although it wasn't the kind of spy who operated in the shadows. Rather, she navigated the well-lit drawing rooms of the wealthy and powerful, gathering intelligence in a different kind of den. Think of smoky back rooms with men in sharp suits, maps spread out on tables, compasses, and codes. At first glance, it might seem like an unlikely setting for a spy. Sometimes, the most dangerous games are played where the chandeliers are gleaming and the stakes are high. Her movements were precise, her bearing elegant. She could have easily passed for someone who had been born into privilege. And that was precisely the impression she wanted to create. But beneath the surface, she was acutely aware of her position. She understood the power dynamics at play, the casual cruelty that could end one's life as abruptly as a gunshot. So, she became a master of reading rooms, of understanding the unspoken rules. As World War I rumbled on, Europe became a battleground, not only of soldiers and strategies, but of secrets. In this environment, Mata Hari thrived. Her story is one of calculated moves and close calls, navigating treacherous social waters where trust was a luxury and danger lurked around every corner. Imagine late-night assignations, hushed voices discussing not just the weather or the latest opera, but the movements of troops, the plans of attack. Her apartments became way stations for messages, the whispered words being more lethal than any weapon. There was always the chance of betrayal, the ever-present risk of being framed. Yet she persisted, moving through the maelstrom of war with a mixture of charm and caution. It's important to remember that she wasn't just a spy, but a performer at heart. Her movements, her gestures, all were part of a carefully constructed persona. This wasn't about disguises or false identities. It was about presenting an image so compelling that it overshadowed any suspicions. And for a while, her strategy worked brilliantly. She danced, she charmed, and she gathered intelligence, all while evading the watchful eyes of those who would seek to silence her. But the war was a long and brutal affair, and eventually the noose tightened around her. Think of a grand ballroom, the kind with gilded mirrors, reflecting the light from 1,000 candles. Amidst the revelry, there's a sense of foreboding, a feeling that something is about to shatter. For Mata Hari, that moment came swiftly. Arrested in 1917, she found herself accused of spying for the Dutch, a charge she vehemently denied. But in the murky world of wartime intelligence, suspicion was often enough to seal one's fate. Picture a stark cell, the rough scrape of stone walls, the heavy clang of the cell door. In this confined space, the once radiant performer confronts her fears. The bustling ballrooms, the adoring audiences, they all fade into a distant memory. Now, the rhythm is dictated by the ticking of a clock, the echo of her own footsteps. As the trial progressed, the whispers about her became louder, more brutal. The meticulously crafted image she had presented to the world was now being torn apart. Every accusation chipped away at the facade until there was little left but raw nerves. It was a dramatic fall from grace, the kind that makes headlines even today. Imagine a courtroom, the solemn faces of judges, the weight of their gaze like a physical pressure. Here, facts and feelings collide. But ultimately, it was the fervor of war that overshadowed the scales of justice. Convicted and sentenced to death, she was given no chance to prove her innocence. It was a swift end, a bullet ending a life that had been filled with calculated moves and close calls. As we reflect on our story, it's essential to remember the context of the time. This was an era when women's roles were rigidly defined, when society's expectations could be as suffocating as a corset. She defied these norms, carving out a space for herself in a man's world, but she did so at a great cost. Her life serves as a reminder that the pursuit of freedom and the struggle against societal constraints are ongoing battles. Her story is a testament to the complexities of female agency, the risks women take, and the lengths they go to in pursuit of autonomy. In a world that often seeks to confine them to the domestic sphere, she dared to dream bigger, to dance in the spotlight, and to navigate the treacherous waters of espionage. But the harsh realities of her time, the rigid societal norms, and the unforgiving nature of the war ultimately led to her downfall. As we remember her, let us also remember the countless women like her who dared to defy the boundaries of their time, whose stories, like hers, deserve to be told and remembered. The world had changed. The Great War raged across Europe, and the once glittering salons of Paris grew dimmer, quieter, edged by anxiety. When Mata Hari continued to move between countries, between admirers, between rumors. Hello, and welcome to this channel. Today, we will continue our exploration of the extraordinary woman who was Mata Hari in Segment 6, her double life and controversial trial. You've heard the stories of Mata Hari, the exotic dancer turned deadly spy. But what if I told you there's more to her tale than meets the eye? Join me as we delve into the enigma of Agent H-21, uncovering secrets that could rewrite history. By 1914, Europe was a powder keg ready to explode. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand had set the stage for the Great War. As the French prepared for battle, they looked to the legendary Mata Hari for solace, for glamour, for distraction from the looming darkness. And she delivered. The can-can dancer, with the smoldering gaze in a past shrouded in mystery, became the toast of Paris. But behind the laughter and applause, shadows lurked. Mata Hari's admirers included not just wealthy bohemians, but men in uniform, men who held the secrets of the nation. As the war dragged on and whispers of German spies grew louder, so did suspicions around Mata Hari. Her cozy familiarity with the enemy became a liability. Soon, the drawing rooms where she dazzled now seemed like treacherous waters. Each smile a calculated move, every glance a potential betrayal. In 1916, the French intelligence service made a stunning claim. They believed Mata Hari was a German spy codenamed H-21. But why? What led them to believe that this enigmatic dancer was weaving a web of deceit? The answer lay in a series of unfortunate coincidences and a healthy dose of wartime paranoia. It all started with a seemingly innocent letter addressed to Mata Hari. It contained concert tickets and a subtle reminder about a rendezvous. But it was the sender that raised eyebrows. He was a German military attaché. Suddenly, Mata Hari's seemingly harmless social life became a tangled web of intrigue. Each meeting, each exchange was scrutinized under the harsh glare of suspicion. And as the war intensified, so did the scrutiny. On February 1917, Mata Hari was arrested in Paris, charged with espionage. The news sent shockwaves. The woman known for her fiery spirit and uninhibited passion was now a prisoner, accused of betraying her adopted country. Her arrest was dramatic, her trial even more so. Held in a converted railway carriage near the Gare de l'Est, the trial was closed to the public. No spectators, no journalists, only a handful of officials and a gaggle of eager diplomats. The stakes were high. If found guilty, Mata Hari could face execution. The prosecution painted a damning picture. They claimed she'd compromised French interests, aided by her lover, Captain Antoine de Bragelonne, a decorated veteran turned alleged traitor. The evidence, a series of coded messages allegedly recovered from Mata Hari's apartment. But the defense argued these were nothing more than love letters. The trial descended into a chaotic mess. Accusations flew, tears were shed, and the ever-present specter of wartime hysteria loomed large. Ultimately, it wasn't the weight of the evidence, but the persuasiveness of the narrative that swayed the jury. In the end, Mata Hari and her lover were found guilty. She was stripped of her citizenship, her lover's rank. They were given the death sentence. As the verdict echoed through the hushed courtroom, one question dominated the minds of onlookers. Was Mata Hari truly a spy, or had the war's shadows consumed reason, twisting love letters into treasonous acts? On October 15, 1917, at the grim hour of 3:30 a.m., Mata Hari's life ended with a neat bullet to the back of her head. Her story didn't end there. Legends like hers rarely do. She became a martyr, a victim of circumstance, a symbol of female empowerment, or a cautionary tale of wartime deceit, depending on who was telling the story. The truth got lost somewhere between her final dance at the Folies Bergères and her tragic demise at the hands of a firing squad. Some say she was a scapegoat used to distract from France's many wartime failures. Others claim she played both sides, reckless with loyalties, careless with names. But one thing is certain. Her life had become a mirror of the war itself, clouded, conflicted, and ultimately consumed by forces far beyond her control. We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you want to know more about the enigmatic world of Mata Hari, don't forget to stay tuned for more captivating stories. And until next time, remember to keep an eye out for the hidden players in history. They might be closer than you think. In the tapestry of war, where every action has a consequence and every choice echoes across lives, the tale of Mata Hari fades into memory, yet we are left with questions. Why did the Germans send that fateful message through her? What did the French gain by showcasing such a dramatic trial? And most importantly, was she truly the master spy she was made out to be? Or was she just a pawn in a game of shadows and secrets? Her story is like a half-remembered dream, a beautiful, haunting melody with missing notes. And we find ourselves piecing together fragments of a life. Born Marguerite Zell in 1876, she chose the exotic name Mata Hari, meaning, yes, you guessed it, morning sun. Her journey started in the bustling streets of Amsterdam. Her father, a successful merchant, encouraged education, but tradition dictated that a good girl must marry well. So at 19, she did. She married an army officer, moved to Java, and became a society hostess. But by 1901, this gilded cage had become too small. She wanted more than the suffocating confines of high society. So she returned to Europe, leaving behind the remnants of a life she'd once thought would be her forever. In Paris, she blossomed. Art, literature, and music were her solace. She absorbed the city's bohemian spirit, frequented the famous Le Pen, Agile, and frequented the company of artists like Picasso and Modigliani. It was here that she transformed from Margaret to Mata Hari, shedding her old life like a worn-out garment and embracing a new persona. She became a dancer, performing the seductive dance of the Seven Veils. She captivated audiences with her belly dances in smoky, dimly lit rooms. Her performances were legendary, said to be both mesmerizing and tantalizing. Men in the audience leaned in, not just to watch the dance, but to catch a glimpse of the woman behind the performance. But how did she capture the essence of this iconic dance? Well, scholars say it wasn't just about shimmying hips or flashing legs. It was about the whole package. The mystery, the allure, the tease. Each move was deliberate, each glance calculated. She didn't just dance. She told a story without words, a story that unfolded in the flickering lamplight and ended with a final, lingering note. And into this world of artistic expression and hidden agendas stepped the spies. World War I raged outside. The stage was set for a dangerous game, consumed by the intoxicating world of art and pleasure. Mata Hari found herself at the center of a web of deceit. The Germans offered her a proposition. They wanted her to carry messages to their agents in France. For them, she was a Loris courier, a distraction for the French authorities. The messages she carried were like Trojan horses, hidden in plain sight. Little did she know the explosive secrets they held. Meanwhile, the French were watching her every move. They suspected her, questioned her, but never really had enough evidence to charge her. That is, until the infamous double cross. When the Germans sent that message through her, they knew it would reach the French. This was no longer about Mata Hari. It was about discrediting her, turning the tables, and letting the French do their dirty work. And so, the inevitable happened. She was arrested, tried, and convicted. The French played their cards right. The trial was a public spectacle, a show of strength and unity. Mata Hari, the exotic dancer, made the perfect scapegoat. She became the face of France's fight against German spies. As the verdict was read, she listened impassively. Guilty. There was no appeal. Her fate was sealed. She was shot at dawn, her body soon forgotten, lying beneath a rough, unadorned grave. Her story became a footnote in history books, a cautionary tale of love, betrayal, and war. Now, the question is, was she the master spy the legend makes her out to be? The truth is, perhaps not. Many historians argue that she was naive, a pawn in the hands of powerful men who used and discarded her. The real story of Mata Hari is a reminder of the times she lived in, a time when women had limited choices and when love and war were nothing but a gamble. Her story is a mosaic of half-remembered dreams, beautiful but incomplete. It's a testament to the human cost of war and the lengths to which desperate lovers and bitter enemies will go. As we bring this episode to a close, we want to hear from you. What do you think about Matahari's story? Do you think she was a victim of circumstance or a cunning spy? Share your thoughts below. And if you enjoyed this episode, please don't forget to like it. Your support means everything to us. Until next time, stay curious and keep asking questions. The answers, my friends, often lie where the shadows meet the light. Imagine the scene. You are there in the tall, dense trees of the Argonne Forest, northeastern France. October 1918. You're an American soldier, and around you are hundreds more like you, all advancing forward as part of the Meuse-Argonne offensive. The forest is thick and dark. Air is heavy with the scent of moss and decay. All around you, trees are lost in an autumn fog, making it hard to see more than a few feet ahead. And the ground beneath your feet is soft and yielding, making it hard to move forward. But orders are orders, and you have been told to press forward. So you move through this hush, this eerie quiet punctuated only by the crunch of leaves underfoot, moving as silently as you can, listening intently for any sign of danger. But then, suddenly, right in the midst of this hushed expectancy, there is a tremendous roar as an artillery shell explodes overhead. Startled, you look up to see a barrage of shells raining down around you. Realizing that you are in the midst of an intense artillery barrage, you drop to the ground and take cover. For a moment, the forest is filled with the deafening roar of cannons and the whistling of shells as they scream through the air. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the barrage lifts. You cautiously raise your head above the ground, blinking against the smoke and haze. And then you notice something that makes your blood run cold. You are surrounded. The forest around you seems to have closed in, cutting you off from the rest of your unit. With a sinking feeling in your stomach, you realize that you and the hundreds of other men around you are now cut off from your supply lines, reinforcements, and most critically, your main body. You are on your own and you have no idea where the enemy is or how to get out of this. In the coming days, you will face hunger, thirst, and relentless attacks. Sometimes, the incoming fire will be so intense that you must take cover in the shallow holes that you dig in the soft earth. Other times, the forest will fall silent, amplifying the crunching of leaves underfoot as your men move restlessly through the undergrowth, desperately searching for a way out. Occasionally, a message will reach you via carrier pigeon, its small heart beating rapidly against the palm of your hand as it delivers your fate. You will learn that thousands of men are coming to rescue you, but then those men will pass you by, unable to see you in the thick undergrowth. Hope will dwindle with each passing hour, replaced by a grim determination to hold out as long as possible. By the sixth day, you are running low on food and ammunition. Men are wounded and dying around you, and you are exhausted. But still, you hold your position, waiting for rescue, praying that you will make it out of this alive. Then suddenly, through the trees, you see a friendly face. Relief floods your being, and you rush to meet them, stumbling into their arms, overcome with emotion. You have survived the Lost Battalion, a tragic chapter in which more than 500 American soldiers found themselves cut off and surrounded. Of those, only 194 would emerge unharmed, having lost nearly 2/3 of their number in just 6 days. But amidst the horror, a hero emerged, a tiny carrier pigeon named Cher Emi, who delivered a message that saved countless lives. Imagine holding that small bird in your hand, feeling the rapid pulse beneath its feathers, and trusting it to carry your fate. This is a story of courage and survival against all odds. It is the story of the Lost Battalion. In the coming minutes, we'll look at the events leading up to this disaster and the desperate race against time to save the men of the Lost Battalion. But first, let's take a moment to explore the aftermath of this harrowing ordeal. When the men of the Lost Battalion finally made contact with friendly forces, they were in a state of utter exhaustion and desperation. Having gone without food for days and under constant threat of enemy fire, they were physically and emotionally drained. Despite their ordeal, these brave soldiers refused to give up. They had shown remarkable resilience and determination to survive, and that spirit did not waver even in the darkest moments. Once rescued, many of the Lost Battalion faced physical and psychological challenges that would affect them for the rest of their lives. The physical wounds of battle were evident, but the psychological scars ran deeper. Some suffered from post-traumatic stress, haunted by the horrors they had witnessed and endured. Others struggled to reintegrate into civilian life, finding it difficult to leave the military mindset of survival and discipline behind. In the aftermath, the nation mourned the loss of so many young men, and the survivors were hailed as heroes. But their story didn't end there. The tragedy of the Lost Battalion led to significant changes within the military, particularly in terms of communication and strategy. It highlighted the need for clear and concise messaging to prevent such a disaster from happening again. Memorials were erected and ceremonies held to honor the fallen and the surviving members of the Lost Battalion. These acts of remembrance aimed to keep the memory of their sacrifice alive and ensure that their bravery was never forgotten, despite the immense suffering and loss of life. The story of the Lost Battalion stands as a testament to the resilience and courage of the human spirit. These men, through their perseverance, taught us that even in the darkest moments, hope and determination can light the way toward survival and healing. In the heart of France's Argonne Forest during the First World War, an American battalion found itself trapped, surrounded, and cut off from their own troops. Their ordeal, known as the Lost Battalion, is a testament to human endurance and the unexpected ways survival can be snatched from the jaws of defeat. The story began with a mission. On September 26, 1918, Major Charles Whittlesey led the 300-man 77th Infantry Regiment's 2nd Battalion into the forest. Their task, alongside the French 47th Division, was to push through German lines and capture the strategic village of Commiers. What followed was a brutal swerve. The attack on the village was successful, but upon reaching it, the troops found it deserted. As they consolidated their positions, the Germans counterattacked, driving the Americans back. And that's when the nightmare began. As the troops retreated, they became lost, cut off from their own side and without a clear path out. Days turned into a blur of dwindling rations, exhaustion, and constant enemy fire. The men slept in shifts, using whatever cover they could find, eating sparingly and drinking from streams. As their numbers dwindled and hope ebbed, they became known as the Lost Battalion. Back at the front, their absence was noted. Messages were sent back, but communication was spotty at best. And as the days passed, conflicting reports emerged. Some said the battalion had been wiped out. Others insisted they were holding out. The reality was somewhere in between, cut off and low on supplies. The men were indeed fighting to stay alive, not necessarily in a battle with the Germans, but against starvation and exposure. As the situation grew more dire, the need for help became more urgent. Relief efforts were organized, but the thick forest and the fluid nature of war made rescue attempts tricky. Some reached the wrong places. Others were driven back by heavy German fire. To make matters worse, the forest's thick undergrowth and lack of landmarks meant that soldiers could easily get lost or fall into enemy traps. But the men weren't completely forgotten. Attempts to reach them continued, one of the most extraordinary being the use of homing pigeons. These birds were literally lifelines, carrying scraps of paper with messages to and from the trapped soldiers. One pigeon, Cher Ami, became a legend. She managed to get through despite being wounded, delivering a message that saved lives by ending a friendly bombardment that threatened to wipe out what remained of the battalion. After what seemed like an eternity, rescue did arrive. On October, the surviving members of the Lost Battalion, fewer than 200, were found, wounded, starving, and exhausted. They were brought back to safety, forever marked by their experience in the Argonne Forest. Of the over 500 men originally sent into the forest, fewer than 200 walked out. The story of the Lost Battalion is one of courage, resilience, and the terrible cost of miscommunication. It serves as a reminder of the complexities of war, where even the best intentions can lead to devastating consequences. So why does the story of the Lost Battalion matter today? It's because their story isn't just about a tragic episode in military history. It's about human endurance in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds. It's a testament to the power of the human spirit to persevere, to keep going even when all seems lost. It's a reminder that war is not just fought on battlefields, but in the hearts and minds of those who endure it. The Lost Battalion endured physical privation, mental anguish, and the constant threat of death. Yet they held on, proving that the will to live, the desire to tell one story, is perhaps the most powerful force of all. If you want to learn more about the Lost Battalion, we've got more information in our app, including photos and videos. Plus, you can see other amazing stories from history's most pivotal moments. You're listening to a story about survival, about men trapped by the enemy, slowly losing hope. It's a story that could only have come out of the Great War, and yet it has all the makings of an adventure yarn. Daring escapes, narrow escapes, impossible odds. So it's not surprising that after they were rescued, the men of the Lost Battalion became minor celebrities. Newspapers around the country printed their names and the details of their harrowing ordeal. The Chicago Tribune ran a front-page story detailing how they de-subsisted on nothing but a few stale biscuits, some candy, and rainwater. The St. Louis Post-Dispatch carried the headline, 272 American boys held by Huns as hostages. Back home in Indiana, the boys from the Lost Battalion were paraded through the streets of their hometown on the back of trucks, waving to cheering crowds. Over 1,000 people showed up to greet them, including the mayor, the local newspaper editor, and the president of DePauw University, their alma mater. Soon, the men of the Lost Battalion were being honored all over the country. Department stores displayed their pictures in the window. Sheet music was published featuring their exploits. Even Hollywood took notice. But the star of the new blockbuster, The Fighting Hopefuls, was none other than Major Charles Whittlesey himself. He was paid $5,000 for his services, which he promptly donated to charity. But while all this was going on, one important thing was missing. Their ordeal was over, but the men of the Lost Battalion still hadn't received their medals. They'd been awarded at a ceremony at the White House. On September 26, 1918, President Woodrow Wilson pinned a Distinguished Service Cross on the chest of each surviving member of the Lost Battalion. 6 medals were awarded posthumously to the families of the dead. The citation read, "For extraordinary heroism in action." But that didn't begin to cover it. In the ensuing years, several members of the Lost Battalion would receive even higher honors. Major Whittlesey was awarded the Medal of Honor, the highest decoration for valor in the U.S. military. His citation read, "For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at risk of life, above and beyond the call of duty." That, too, seemed inadequate somehow. After the war, he struggled to readjust to civilian life. He traveled extensively in Europe, eventually finding work as a mining engineer. But he never really recovered from his wartime experiences. In 1921, while on a voyage from New York to France, he disappeared. One witness claimed to have seen him standing at the rail. Another claimed to have heard a splash in the middle of the night. Whittlesey was presumed drowned, though his body was never recovered. Okay? Back in the States, another hero of the Lost Battalion was getting his due. Private John Milton Cooper received a Medal of Honor for carrying a message from the besieged troops to the American commander, General Robert Bullard, flying back to the front in a flimsy biplane. Cooper dodged German anti-aircraft fire to drop 2 white phosphorus bombs over the target. When his plane went down, he managed to escape and make his way back to friendly lines, all while carrying the battalion's desperate plea for help. For his service, He was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross, a Distinguished Service Cross, and a Purple Heart. He would go on to serve in World War II, retiring from the Air Force as a lieutenant colonel. And what of Cher AME, the pigeon? Well, once the war was over, the bird was plucked from its perch and stuffed, spent a few years on display at the American Museum of Natural History, before moving to the Smithsonian, where it remains to this day. It may seem strange to revere a bird as a war hero, but then the story of the Lost Battalion is full of strange ironies, suffering and heroism, death and remembrance, the darkness of war and the glimmer of hope. By the end of the war, over 7 million Americans had served in the military. More than 100,000 never came home. How do we remember them today? Do we tell their stories, or do we let the world move on without them? The story of the Lost Battalion reminds us that neither forgetting nor remembering is ever easy. Sometimes it takes just the right combination of bravery, luck, and a little bit of hope to keep the story alive. So the next time you hear a news report about a wounded veteran, be sure to listen closely. He might just have a story worth telling. I've been your host. This is our podcast. We'll see you next week. We've been here before. This world of hushed voices and polite fictions. It's not a new story. But what did everyday life look like for Britain's upper classes during World War I? How did they experience a conflict that was in some ways so very present and in others so very far away? Well, let's take tea, for instance, because tea is everything. As long as Blighty was supplied with tea, all would be well. When Britain entered the war, the Times newspaper warned that without tea, the nation could not endure. Not only did tea provide a comforting ritual, a moment of calm amidst the chaos, but its consumption also demonstrated patriotic duty. If you drank your tea, then the Germans would surely lose their war. Even the Queen Mother would later recall being told by her mother that during the war, one must have lots of tea and never complain. And who better to ensure a steady supply than the women of the drawing room? For many upper-class women, the war effort began and ended here. They rolled up their sleeves and tackled an entirely new industry, knitting socks and balaclavas and scarves for the troops. By 1914, the fashion press was already full of patterns and ideas for what might be knitted, and what would be best for the job. What was fashionable now was anything but frivolous. Bright colors gave way to somber tones, while black was deemed too depressing. A little beige was thought just the thing to raise the spirits. So, while knitting needles clicked and soft fabrics piled up, conversations turned to the boys in the fighting of far-off war. After all, this was a war to end all wars, okay? And these women knew their sons, brothers, and cousins would soon return home to them. Such confidence might seem strange to our modern eyes. We know now how devastating the war's end will be, how much death and destruction lies ahead, okay? But these women saw themselves as sheltering the flame of civilization, keeping it alive until peace returned. Some would even go on to volunteer as nurses, offering comfort and care to the very different world of the battlefield. But for many others, life went on much as before, with garden parties and country walks and the theater. Yes, even the theater. Plays were one of the few forms of entertainment still available to Britons. After all, no one was going abroad anymore, and most young men had either enlisted or been called out. Cinema was still relatively new, a bit of a sideshow, and with the arrival of total darkness descending early in the evening, there wasn't much time for much else but those who could afford it. A trip to the theater remained the best way to don one's finest clothes, adjust one's mask, and slip into an imaginary world for a few stolen hours. Audiences flocked to see lighter comedies and romantic dramas, though some plays tackled the subject of the war more directly. Siegfried Sassoon as the Admirable Bashford and Conan Doyle as the Man with the 20th Face both premiered in 1916 to great acclaim. After the play, of course, came dinner, oysters, and champagne, lobster thermidor, grilled mutton chops, peaches, and cream, Food was one of the last bastions of the old world. It was expensive, plentiful, and in some ways untouched by the conflict raging just beyond the horizon. In restaurants and dining rooms, menus changed with the seasons, just as they always had. Gamekeepers stalked the countryside, bringing down rabbits and grouse and partridges. Chefs simmered sauces and desserts. Waiters served cucumber sandwiches and beer. But as the years passed and food prices soared, austerity eventually made its way to the drawing room table. Still, life went on. Parties were planned. Dances were held. Invitations were sent out, sometimes with the sender's status as a war widow or a wounded veteran carefully noted. Amidst the waltzes and the whispered gossip, the specter of death hung heavy. Let us imagine now the scene as the guests depart, their laughter echoing in the empty hall. You stand at the top of the stairs and watch them go, each figure outlined against the gaslight. You are alone now. You remove your mask and turn back to the shadows, back to the secrets kept in these four walls, back to the cost of living, the rationing, the telegram received this morning. The world has changed, and you with it. But down here, for now, life goes on. During World War II, an estimated 85 million people were forcibly relocated within their own countries or across international borders. An incredible number. And yet, despite all this movement, there was something that stayed put: the salons. These intimate spaces within grander homes continued on, changing with the times, yet holding fast to their traditions. In this episode, we've been looking at how the war transformed relationships and how love stories unfolded under the shadow of bombs. Now, we want to talk about fashion and the role of salons during the war. We'll consider what women wore, what they discussed over tea, and how high fashion evolved during the war. The war altered everything, including the clothes people wore. But high fashions did not vanish during the war. It evolved. Silhouettes grew simpler, hemlines rose modestly, and materials were rationed, yet elegance remained. Paris had long been the world capital of fashion, and during the war, it was here that designers like Coco Chanel began to gain traction by blending luxury with restraint. Picture this: you're stepping into a grand salon. The velvet drapes are drawn. The scent of perfume is faint in the air. Women in structured skirts and tailored blouses speak softly of exhibitions, of poetry, of sons they hope will return. This intimate gathering could still be quite ornate, but it's also increasingly austere. The frivolity of the Belle Epoque has given way to something more serious. The guests may be dressed in their finest clothes, but they know that luxuries like silk and satin are no longer the height of fashion. Practicality has become the new luxury. These salons, however, were not just places of refined taste. They were sanctuaries, support systems where women could discuss the increasingly dire situation outside. While the threat of war loomed over Europe, some women found solace in the rituals of the salon. As bombs fell and anxiety mounted, the salon became a place for quiet rebellion, a refusal to let despair win. It was a testament to the enduring human spirit. Even the most fragile lace, stitched carefully in the dim light of a lamp, seemed to whisper, "We endure." The conversation in these rooms ranged from the trivial to the profound. Writers like Dorothy Bussey observed the evolving styles, noting the shift from lavish hats to simpler headwear, a subtle yet telling sign of the times. Salons were also platforms for intellectual discourse. Women like Mara and Sylvia Beach kept the salons going, sustained by the belief in the power of conversation. They hosted literary figures such as Gertrude Stein and readings from writers like Ernest Hemingway. The Lost Generation, as Hemingway's work came to be known, found its voice in these intimate settings. But it wasn't just about the clothes or the conversations. Salons served as vital social hubs, offering a respite from the chaos outside. Charity auctions were held, music recitals took place, and cultural figures found refuge and inspiration within these four walls. In neutral countries like Switzerland and the Netherlands, salons became melting pots of culture, opinion, and even intrigue, attracting diplomats and spies alike. Fashion itself became a form of resistance, a silent outcry against the bleak reality outside. By adhering to the rituals of dress, women were making a statement. They were saying, "We will not be defeated." As the war dragged on, the fashion statements became more pronounced. In Britain, where women donned utility clothing, a practical yet stylish uniform of sorts, Parisian elegance was seen as a defiant act. When Chanel released her now famous suit, a blend of masculine tailoring and feminine charm, it was more than just a fashion statement. It was a rejection of the austerity demanded by the times. It was a quiet revolution. By 1943, fashion had taken on a somber tone. British women were encouraged to wear darker colors, with outfits primarily in shades of navy, gray, and green. Hats were now made of felt or straw, and shoes were practical, sturdy, and often shared by sisters. Yet, even within these constraints, personal style shone through. Accessories, scarves, and jewelry became more meaningful, often passed down heirlooms, taking on new significance. As the war in Europe drew to a close, so too did many of the salons as we knew them. The grand houses emptied, the conversations fell silent. But the spirit of the salon, the quest for beauty and meaning in dark times, that endured. It echoed in the streets, where victory celebrations were tempered by the loss and hardships endured. It resonated in the hearts of those who had held on to their ideals, their faith in humanity, and their belief in the transformative power of art and conversation. The per se of perfume, the rustle of thick, crisp paper, the scratch of a fountain pen on stationery. These are the sensory details that come to mind when we think of a bygone era of elegance and grace. But have you ever wondered what it would have been like to receive mail during World War II? What did the letters and telegrams say? Who were they to? How were they censored? Were there secret messages hidden between the lines? How did they affect the people who received them? If you're enjoying this episode, please subscribe so you never miss an upload. Thank you. In this episode, we will take a journey back in time to explore the fascinating world of letters and telegrams during wartime. We will uncover the stories behind the words and discover how they provide a window into the past. Our story begins in the drawing rooms and officers' quarters of Europe, where the upper classes live a life far removed from the horrors of war. They are cut off from the fighting, yes, but also cut off from their loved ones who are at the front, and so correspondence becomes their lifeline, a way to stay connected to the outside world. The rich could afford to send telegrams, which were quick and to the point, but also rather expensive. The content was often terse and devoid of emotion. They might contain a single sentence, such as "arrive safely" or "see you next week," followed by a signature. If you wanted to know more about the battle, this was not the way to find out. The telegram was not meant to convey anything beyond the most basic information. The sender would typically use a code word or phrase to indicate the true meaning behind their message. This was done to avoid detection by censors who were always on the lookout for sensitive information. For example, a message reading "all well" might actually mean that the sender had been injured or taken prisoner. By using coded language, the sender could communicate information without tipping off the enemy. The recipient would then know how to respond without raising suspicion. But for those who wanted to share more than just a few words, letters were the preferred method of communication. They provided an opportunity for emotional expression and could be filled with coded messages. Before writing a letter, the sender would carefully consider their words. They knew that everything they wrote could potentially be intercepted and used against them. So they developed clever ways to convey information without drawing attention to themselves. They might describe an event or a situation in great detail, but then leave out key facts that could compromise security. For example, a letter describing a party might mention everything from the food to the music. but carefully avoid any details about the guests or the host. On the receiving end, the recipient will be trained to look for these subtle cues and extract the hidden meaning from the text. This practice of hiding messages in plain sight became a common occurrence during the war years. People found ways to communicate information without tipping off the enemy, ensuring that the precious letters and telegrams continued to flow. Now, censorship was a fact of life during the war. The authorities monitored all outgoing and incoming mail to prevent the enemy from obtaining sensitive information. Censors would scan letters and telegrams for keywords and phrases that could compromise security. Anything deemed suspicious was immediately removed from the text and replaced with black ink or a red stamp. Sometimes, entire letters were confiscated and destroyed. It was a difficult task, but a necessary one if the Allies were to maintain their advantage. Despite the risk, people continued to write and send messages. They knew that the personal touch of a handwritten note or the brevity of a telegram could make all the difference. After all, it wasn't just about sending a message. It was about staying connected to the ones you love in a time of great uncertainty. We can learn a lot about the people of that era through their letters and telegrams. They were able to maintain a sense of normalcy and connection even in the darkest of times. They were able to communicate information without tipping off the enemy, and they were able to keep the spirit of hope alive. So the next time you receive a letter or telegram, take a moment to appreciate the power of words and the importance of human connection. Who knows, you might just uncover a hidden message from the past. And thank you for joining us on this journey through time. Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring. Narrator. And it's not just this image we get of these wonderful feasts going on that does unreally sit comfortably with the idea of people going hungry and being cold and all the rest of it. It's also the language that's used in some of the descriptions of food. When we think of people queuing up for their weekly rations of food, we think of them as being hungry people. But look at this description of how people are eating their oranges. This is from a British newspaper in 1943. It says, "A penny for your thoughts," said the woman serving. "Oh, nothing," said the girl, munching an orange. "I've got 5 minutes," she said, "before my next patient comes. Would you like one of these? They're delicious." She peeled another orange with deft fingers. "No, thank you," said the woman. "I never eat oranges in the morning. I find they upset my stomach. Do you? Not me. I can eat anything, okay? Oranges, apples, I don't mind, okay?" She took the proffered fruit and bit into it, juice running down her chin. "They say," said the woman, "that oranges are good for the skin." The girl laughed. "Perhaps that explains it. I always have a complexion like a boiled potato. No one has ever accused me of being too fond of fresh fruit. But during the last few years, I've learned to like them. Oranges, apples, plums, I eat them all now. It isn't a bad thing to learn. You know," she said, "I often think that the best thing that is come out of this whole nasty Q business is that we've learned to appreciate the simple things of life so much more than we used to. Oranges, apples, potatoes, the sunshine when it shines, a day off, a good book, a good film, a good friend to talk to. Yes, we've learned to appreciate these simple things. So there's no sense here of the speaker being hungry. No sense of them really going without. It's just a part of life. And yet, of course, this is written in the midst of a rationing system which is saying that certain foods, including oranges, are in short supply. So where are the oranges coming from? Well, possibly from delis or corner shops that are able to import food because they're better connected. Possibly from private gardens. But nevertheless, it's interesting to see how the language of plenty still persists. Narrator. So this is a picture then of a society transformed, but also of a society in which old habits die hard. It's a world of blackouts and queues, yes, but also of dinner parties and rationing. And that combination creates a very strange world indeed. You're listening to a novel. It's the summer of 1916, and you've come for a visit to an English country estate. The fields stretching out before you are still, the gardens orderly, the lawn well tended. But something is not right. Where are the footmen? You ask. The young master went down with the ship, they say, meaning the Titanic. The second son just left for the front. The hall, once bustling with the activity of staff going about their duties, is eerily quiet. This is the story of a house, and those who lived there during World War I conscription changed the rhythms of aristocratic life. Men who had been clerks, stable hands, gardeners, and drivers were called to serve their country. This meant that many country houses were suddenly short-staffed. Some families adapted and some didn't, but almost all of them suffered the loss of a son or a brother. Many never came back. Those that did often bore the marks of their experiences, physically or mentally, or both. Women stepped into roles previously unthinkable. They managed the finances, oversaw the repairs, even plowed fields. One lady at the house wrote, "I wish I could tell you what it means to have the responsibility of an estate in wartime thrust upon one without a single soul to help me. Everyone seems to think that I ought to be able to do everything that my 6 sons used to do, but this wasn't a new way of life for women. It was an emergency measure, a stopgap until the men came home. They moved into these roles reluctantly and with a great deal of trepidation. A daughter might be helping her father work an adding machine, while another cooked, cleaned, and mended. A sister might take over her brother's job, driving the tractor, while another trained as a nurse. When they took on traditionally male roles, they did so with a mixture of pride and diffidence. One woman wrote, "I feel I'm doing man's work and don't want to get too masculine, but I'm afraid I'm losing my feminine nature and becoming too much like a man myself." Older staff were coaxed out of retirement to help out, and the rigid rules of class and status were temporarily suspended. Lady Rose wrote, "We had a very mixed and rather motley crew of servants, a misfit lot, but they were game and they stuck to us. There was a shortage of labor and an acute awareness of the hardships faced by others. People were doing their best to make the best of a bad job." The estate, always a symbol of tradition, now bore the signs of interruption. Rooms were closed off. The billiard room, the smoking room, the library, the stables were eerily quiet. No longer were they filled with the sounds of horses being groomed and tacked up for riding or driven. Polished brass and gleaming leather were everywhere, gathering dust. Events were canceled or subdued. No more dinner parties or balls. No more lavish lunches or drawing room entertainment. Instead, there were cups of tea and sandwiches for visitors. The sense of foreboding and uncertainty made people cling to the familiar. The hedges still needed trimming. The fires still needed lighting. The carpets still needed beating. The tea still needed pouring. All of these small acts of continuity in an uncertain world offered a small comfort. But the war wasn't just endured passively, okay? The family planted a victory garden and grew their own vegetables. They raised chickens and rabbits for meat. They joined the local food committees. They collected and rationed sugar, flour, and fat. They baked their own bread and made their own jams and jellies. They knitted socks for the soldiers and sent boxes of supplies to the Red Cross. And whenever they heard a new piece of music played on the wireless, they danced to it in the drawing room. Slowly, very slowly, life began to return to normal. Sons and brothers came back from the front, though often they were changed, bearing the marks of their experiences. New staff were hired. The house echoed again with the sounds of activity. Meals were served in the dining room. Laughter and conversation filled the halls. But the tranquility of the place was gone. Nothing would ever be quite the same again. So we're back in that drawing room then. Yes, all the lights are turned down low because there isn't enough electricity to go around, you know. The servants have gone out, into the night to try and find something to eat. And you and your sister are sitting there peeling potatoes, you know, for the the wounded soldiers. Well, Penelope, what are you thinking? Oh, I was just thinking how strange it all is. Strange that we are doing this now. Rather than having affairs and being frivolous. Yes, I agree. But someone has to do it, you know? Someone has to run the country while those poor men fight in the mud. It's our duty, you know? Duty, yes. And with their resources, connections, and visibility. Many members of the aristocracy turned toward philanthropy during the war. Not just out of duty, but as an assertion of relevance. You might picture a grand drawing room converted into a hospital ward. Chandeliers above, crisp linen beds below, ladies so tending to bandages, learning nursing protocols, overseeing soup deliveries, Red Cross drives, fundraising galas, letters to Parliament, quiet influence, carefully exercised. For some, this was sincere conviction. For others, performance. But the results mattered. Funds were raised, medical supplies delivered. The wounded received care, and the aristocracy, once viewed as out of touch, found a new narrative. One of usefulness of service. These were not radical changes, but they signaled shifting ground. As the war reshaped society, it offered the old elite a chance to reimagine their place within it. But not everyone felt the need to adapt. Virginia Woolf famously refused to participate in the national effort, choosing instead to write. Not all aristocrats saw the value in changing their ways, clinging instead to a sense of immutable superiority. Characters like Tita in Downton Abbey, whose class consciousness never wavers, even in the face of a changing world. Or, my father up there, who thinks that, oh no, we don't do that sort of thing. We've got our chauffeurs and our personal servants, and we really couldn't be bothered to get our hands dirty. No, I don't think they would have done that. Lady Grantham, however, finds herself in a different position. The old world is gone, and she must navigate a new reality. She has lost her son and her fortune, and now she has to rely on the kindness of strangers. Even her friends desert her, leaving her alone in a crumbling abbey with only the memory of her former self. And yet, like Lady Grantham, the institution of the British aristocracy endured. Wounded, but not defeated, it entered a new phase of its existence. As the 20th century wore on, philanthropy became an increasingly important part of the aristocracy's identity. Aristocrats set up foundations and endowed chairs at universities. They funded hospitals and museums. They became patrons of the arts. And they did all of this in the name of social good, but also in the name of their own survival. In a world that was rapidly changing, the aristocracy had to find a new way to justify its existence. And so they turned to philanthropy as a way of giving back to the society that had given them so much. The first phase of this new philanthropic age began after the First World War, as the British aristocracy sought to atone for the sins of empire and war. The second phase began after the Second World War, as the British Empire gave way to the British Commonwealth. And the third phase began in the late 20th century as Britain entered the European Union and then embraced a market economy. Throughout all of these changes, the British aristocracy remained constant, adapting and evolving, but always surviving. And so it is today. The British aristocracy is one of the oldest and most respected institutions in the country, and its members continue to make significant contributions to society through their philanthropy. Now, I'm not suggesting that the British aristocracy is perfect. Indeed, far from it. There are many problems with hereditary inequality and entrenched privilege, but I am suggesting that the British aristocracy has a long and proud history of public service, and that its members should be judged by their actions, not their birthright. So next time you see a member of the British aristocracy, take a moment to appreciate the contribution that they are making to society. Who knows, it might just make their day. And if you want to learn more about the British aristocracy, stay tuned. This is an episode about art, music, and literature. But since we're talking about these things in the context of a world war, I thought it might be useful to start with a trigger warning. is not going to be an episode about cute puppies or rainbows. It's going to be an episode about people dying. Okay, let's do this. In the salons of the well-to-do artists gathered. Some had fled the violence of the front lines. Others were too young or too old to enlist. All of them were trying to make sense of a world turned upside down. Many were successful, creating works that captured the strangeness of wartime society, a society in which balls and banquets still took place, but now they were punctuated by air raid sirens. Musicians like the Polish composer Krzysztof Basevich were inspired by the heroism of everyday life. She channeled the quiet courage of nurses and the defiance of those resisting the occupation. Her music became a refuge for many, a reminder of beauty in dark times. Writers also documented this strange duality. Some wrote about the privileged world they inhabited, the drawing rooms and dinner parties that continued as if nothing was amiss. Other stories focused on the stark realities of war, the loss of loved ones, the constant threat of violence. Irish writer Elizabeth Bowen published a collection of stories titled The Death of the Heart. It was until many years later that she revealed that the story was set in wartime, London, during the Blitz. You can imagine how the public might have reacted had they known. Knowing what we know now about her own privileged position, they may have judged her work as out of touch, but by setting her story in a vague, unspecified time, she was able to capture something universal about the experience of war, its impact on individuals and relationships. That universality is what gives her work its power. But for every writer who chose to publish anonymously, there were others who wrote openly and defiantly. Czech writer Milan Kundera, for example, refused to leave his homeland when the Germans came. He stayed and he wrote. His early novels were satirical, but as the war dragged on, so did his listlessness. By the time the Russians arrived, he was ready to leave. His novel, The Joke, published in 1967, reflected the disillusionment and disorientation of a generation. Painters, too, responded to the shifting times. Austrian painter Oskar Kokoschka, for example, painted portraits of his contemporaries. They were people from his social circle, people who were living through this upheaval, but they were also representatives of an era. There was a shared understanding between artist and subject, recognition that the world was changing, and these portraits captured that moment of transition. They also, however, represented a break from tradition. Gone were the days of grand opera and ballets, russes. In their place, a new sensibility, one that valued simplicity and directness over spectacle. Fashion illustration, too, took on a new tone. The frivolity of pre-war designs gave way to more dignified styles. In France, the couturiers took up knitting needles to make warm clothes for soldiers at the front. Back home, women wore outfits that were less about luxury and more about practicality. So what does it all mean? What does it mean that so many artists were responding to the war in such personal ways? Well, for one thing, it shows that even in the darkest of times, the human spirit endures. It finds ways to express itself, to create beauty out of chaos, but it also reveals something about the limitations of art. These artists were mostly responding to their own experiences, the experiences of those around them. They were not immune to the horrors of war, but they were somewhat insulated from its worst effects. Their world was one of relative privilege and safety, and their art reflects that. It's often beautiful, sometimes haunting, but rarely does it offer a critique of the war itself. Still, it's important to remember that this was a time of great upheaval and transformation. The old order was crumbling, and with it, the foundations of their culture. For many of these artists, it was a time of great personal growth and change. They were coming of age in a world that was on the brink of collapse, and they responded by creating some of the most powerful and moving art of the 20th century. Next time, we're going to talk about propaganda and popular culture. If you want to get a preview, thanks for watching. See you next time. This house has seen better days, but it's not alone. Across Europe, grand estates like this one are fading into memory. Not all, mind you, but many. For the Great War marked the twilight of an era. It was the death knell for countless aristocratic structures. Titles remained, but their relevance waned. Mansions stayed, but many were sold or repurposed. The world was changing, hurtling towards an urban, industrial, democratic future. And these houses increasingly felt like relics of a past that was passing. Imagine, if you will, a young duke returning home from the trenches. His uniform is wrinkled, his eyes are distant. The great hall of his ancestral home feels strange and cold. The echo of boots on marble stairs replaces the lilting waltz of a bygone age. The traditions he inherited suddenly feel out of step with the century he helped shape. Who are these dukes and duchesses now? What purpose do they serve? What meaning can they find in a world reshaped by war? This is a house made for dukes and duchesses. In the years before the Great War, it would have been filled with servants. Footmen would have polished the shoes of its noble residents, while gardeners sculpted the hedges outside into intricate shapes. But those were other times. After the war, titles didn't disappear, but they lost some of their shine. Many aristocrats, including this family, found their estates too costly to maintain, so they sold them, leaving these rooms echoing with the ghosts of better days. This is what's left of the drawing room. Once a place for leisurely conversation, now it's a space for quiet reflection. Outside, the world is changing. New technologies emerge. Cities grow. Democracies become more vocal. But here, inside these four walls, there's a sense of time standing still. And yet, change was afoot. Many nobles, like the dukes and duchesses, saw the writing on the wall. They sensed the old ways wouldn't last forever, so they adapted. Some dove into politics, others into business or diplomacy. They used their connections, their status, their education, steering themselves and their families toward new roles in a new world. They were the lucky ones. For some, this house represented a way of life worth preserving. They poured their resources into its upkeep, determined to keep its fires burning bright against the winds of change. And yet, even here, in this fashion of tradition, subtle shifts occurred. Aristocrats continued to marry, but more often than not, love came after the ceremony. Practical considerations often took precedence over romance. The emphasis on duty and legacy remained, but the personal touch blossomed nonetheless. And then there were the women. Before the war, they might have been expected to master the art of the drawing room, perfecting their needlework while mastering polite conversation. But now, having proven their capabilities, they weren't ready to go back. Many refused to relinquish the roles they'd filled during the war, choosing instead to remain active in public life. They became teachers, writers, even business owners, shattering the image of the delicate flower confined to the drawing room. They were agents of change, proving that women could and should have a place beyond the home. The war had shifted expectations, opening unexpected doors. The aristocracy did not vanish, but they were transformed. Their influence, once unquestioned, was now debated, recalibrated. They became one of many voices in a chorus demanding to be heard. This house stands as a testament to a bygone era, a silent sentinel of a world that's past. Its rooms whispered tales of dukes and duchesses, of balls and banquets, of a way of life that once thrived within these walls. But it also speaks to a pivotal moment in history, a time when tradition and modernity collided, when the old order was challenged, when the aristocracy was forced to adapt or fade. As our journey draws to a close, we find ourselves not just in a physical space, but in a realm of memory and transformation. We've walked through battle-scarred trenches and quiet drawing rooms, reliving moments from a century ago. But we've also witnessed the enduring spirit of humanity, the resilience of the human heart, and the indomitable will to shape a better world. The Great War may be over, but its echoes resonate still. Okay, And as we stand here amidst the remnants of yesterday, we realize that the true story of this war isn't just about the battles fought. It's about the lives lived, the choices made, and the enduring quest for a lasting peace. In our final moments together, I want to show you something. Not the mud of Flanders or the blood of Ypres, but this, a field of white crosses under a leaden sky. Men killed in action, 1914, 1,918. They came from a world away, these men, to fight and die in a field in Belgium. In their passing, they left behind the scent of honeysuckle and the sound of church bells. They left behind women in white dresses and children on bicycles. They left behind houses like this, brick and ivy, solid and sure, and the life that went on inside them, tea and cake and talk. We've been through so much together. The horror of the front line, the grinding of the guns, the waste of men. Okay, it's hard to imagine anything happening in a house like this, anything other than routine, and yet it did. On a cold November morning, 1914, a shell screamed down from the sky and landed on this very spot. 4 young women were inside. Their day began like any other, straightening pictures, polishing boots, tending fires. But now there was a new sound in the house, the lapping of water, the crackle of flames, the smell of smoke, a tea. Then the roof fell in. When the soldiers returned to this house, they found one girl kneeling by the stairs. Her name was Cecile. She'd refused to leave the house, even as it burned. She stayed until the end, tending to the dying. When they brought her down from the attic, she was covered in soot, her face streaked with dirt. She looked like an angel, said one soldier. By the time this picture was taken, she was gone. The girls died in different ways and in different places, but they all came back here. Back to this room, back to this house, back to each other. Sometimes the line between life and death was a fine one, and sometimes it seemed as though those left behind might have it both ways. Alive, yet touched by death, living with ghosts. In the aftermath, people struggled to find their footing. How could they move forward without knowing how the story would end? What was there to come back to? How could they rebuild without knowing if they'd be allowed to stay? People had changed, but had they changed enough? In the space of 4 years, Europe had changed. Nothing would be the same again. And within that vast upheaval, individual lives had changed, too. Soldiers had become poets and pacifists, nurses, saints. Lovers had become widows and widowers. Children had become orphans. And in the midst of those changes, some things had also stayed the same. Distance had not diminished devotion. Imagine a letter written by a private arriving at a noble estate. The handwriting is coarse, the words simple, but the sentiment clear. He thanks the lady of the house for wool socks and asks for nothing more. In another place, a shell screamed through the air, landing with a sickening crunch in a farmyard. T killed 2 cows and sent up a spray of dirty water. The farmer felt the ground beneath his feet turn to jelly. He saw his prized cows collapse in a shower of blood and guts, and he smelled the coppery tints of blood on his own torn and useless hands. He was done fighting. He'd had enough. War had come to his farmyard, and now he was finished with it. Some returned home and started over, leaving the past behind like a discarded uniform. For others, the past never let them go. The scars of war, physical and mental, remained. In the silence of a bedroom or the solitude of an attic, memories returned, unwelcome, uninvited, inescapable. As the smoke cleared and soldiers returned, societies wrestled with what had changed, what had not. Sacrifice had not been equal, nor had distance. Imagine a letter written by a private, arriving at a noble estate. The handwriting is coarse, the words simple, but the sentiment clear. He thanks the lady of the house for wool socks and asks for nothing more. The war had drawn strange connections between trench and townhouse, between nurse and nursemaid. between those who gave blood and those who gave comfort, between those who fought for king and country and those who waited. But even in shared grief, class remained, some rebuilt with ease, others with effort. But all carried marks, some visible, some buried. Those who had once laughed in drawing rooms now sat in darkened rooms. Those who had once sipped sweet tea now cradled bitter memories. Those who had once danced with abandon now moved with care. Those who had once marched in step now walked alone. Those who had given everything now wanted only peace. History remembers both, the thunder of artillery and the quiet of drawing rooms, the muddy trench and the perfumed salon, the charge of the light brigade and the gentle clink of teaspoons. Remembers the great events and the small ones too, the tremble of a hand reaching for a cup, the flicker of a candle flame, the soft tread of feet on a stair. And as we close, we return not to war but to sleep, to rest, knowing that in understanding the past, its discomfort, its contradictions, we soften the sharpness of its memory. The year is 1916. The place, a small village in France. For 5 years, the men have been gone, off to fight in the Great War. But tonight, they're coming home. They're coming home for leave. They'll spend a few precious days with their families before returning to the front. In the meantime, their wives will tend the garden, cook meals, and mend uniforms. Their children will gather around their parents' knees, listening intently to stories of life before the war, of Paris, of school, of peace. And then the men will leave again, and the village will be silent. But for now, it is night, and the men are home. Let us walk among them, unseen, unheard, and listen to their stories. It is a warm summer evening. A young girl skips through the village, her skirt swirling around her legs like a lavender cloud. Her name is Louise. She stops at each house, calling out, "Maman, are you coming? Maman, are you coming?" A woman leans out of an upstairs window. "Not now, Louise. I am busy." Gruff voice calls from somewhere below. "Go away, child. You'll break my concentration." The girl skips on, reaching the last house in the village. Here, the door is open, and a gentle voice calls, "Come in, my darling. Your father is home." Louise runs inside. In the kitchen, a man is helping his wife set the table. He is tall and handsome, with a neatly trimmed mustache and a bandage on his left arm. Their daughter throws her arms around his neck. "Papa, Papa," she cries. The man picks her up and kisses her hair. "Did you miss me, my little sparrow?" "I missed you so much," she whispers, burying her face in his uniform. "I'm home now," he murmurs, "and I won't go away again for a long time." The woman takes the child from the man and tucks her into a high chair. "Your father must rest first. Then we will talk and eat and laugh." Across the table, a letter lies unopened. On the edge of the table, a half-written letter rests beside an ink bottle and a fountain pen. All three are untouched. The couple eat in silence, each lost in thought. The girl watches them, her eyes wide and innocent. When her father reaches across the table to take her hand, the woman pulls it back. "Don't forget," she says softly, "tomorrow you must write a letter to your aunt." The man nods. After dinner, he helps his wife clear the table while their daughter plays on the floor nearby. Once the dishes are put away, he sits down heavily in a chair, closing his eyes. The woman begins to tidy the room, and the girl crawls up onto her father's lap and begins to stroke his hair. "Tell me a story, Papa," she whispers. "Tell me about Paris." The man opens his eyes and looks down at his daughter. A faint smile touches his lips. "Paris," he begins, and the little girl snuggles closer to him, listening intently as her father's voice weaves tales of a faraway city of lights and laughter. It's unseen, unheard. We watch them. We stand in the doorway, our eyes fixed on the family, the picture of domestic bliss. It's almost enough to make us forget. But we remember, because in the corner of the room, the clock chimes softly, reminding us that tomorrow, once again, the men will leave, and the great war will rumble on. As the voices of the past grow quiet again, let the stillness settle in your room. Let the hum of modern life replace the distant echoes of the Great War. You've traveled far tonight, through forgotten routines and remembered names, through the trench and the terrace. Okay? As your eyes begin to close, may rest come easily. Until next time, when we'll return to another forgotten corner of history. Softly, slowly, together. Good night.